CockroachDB serverless is free, and creating a cluster and connecting your app to it is really straightforward. But once you've done that, how do you actually get your data into it? Well, it turns out there are actually a lot of ways. In this video, we're going to look at a couple different ways of importing data that's coming from another SQL database. But if your data is in another format, like maybe some CSV files, check out the links in the description below because we've got documentation to walk you through how to do that too. Okay, so the first step in getting our data into our CockroachDB serverless cluster is to export it from our previous database. Now the process for doing that will vary based on the specifics of your database, but you want two specific files: a dump of your database schema and then a dump of the data itself. Most databases have tools that make creating these files pretty easy. For example, in Postgres, you could use pgdump with specific flags. The S flag will create a schema-only dump, and the A flag will create a data-only dump. In some cases, you might get a .SQL file directly exported, but in our case, we're dumping from a Heroku Postgres database, and that outputs .dump files. This is an archive file, so we'll use pgrestore to convert it into a .SQL file. If you're working with files from some other type of SQL database, the specific steps you need to take to export your schema and data may be different, but the process should be pretty straightforward and covered in the documentation of whatever database you were using. Whatever database you're coming from, for this approach, you want to end up with two .SQL files like what we've got here: a schema file and a data file. Step 2. We're now going to convert the schema using CockroachDB's schema conversion tool. Assuming you've already signed up for a CockroachDB Cloud account, we can get to this from our clusters page. We're going to click on Migrations, and then we can simply drag our schema file into the box to upload it and begin the migration. I should note that as of this video recording, this only works for Postgres database dumps. So if you're working with a schema dump from something like MySQL, you'll have to make adjustments to the SQL manually and then upload it the same way that we'll upload our data in step 3. However, we're going to be adding support for some other popular databases to this tool quite soon. So if you're watching this video anytime after November 2022, you should definitely check, as we might have added support for your database too. Anyway, when the file's done uploading, we'll get this screen. Since every database schema is different, you're probably going to see something slightly different here, but basically there are two things: errors, which we have to fix before we can successfully complete the migration, and suggestions, which we may want to address, but we won't have to address them to complete the migration. With the example database that we're migrating from here, we can see that there are 16 errors in the schema that we'll need to fix. So let's click on the View Statements button to see them in more detail. The Statements page highlights all of the errors and suggestions from our .SQL file, as well as makes recommendations and allows us to make changes right from this page. We can hit this Edit button to edit any of the statements that we see. In this case, it looks like there's only one real error in our schema: 16 references to a SQL user that doesn't currently exist in the CockroachDB cluster that we created. And we can fix that right on this page. We'll just click this Add User button, generate a password and save it, and now we should be good to go. Since that was the only error, let's scroll back to the top and hit Retry Migration. And it worked. Now we can hit Finalize Schema and create a name for the database that we're importing. We can also download the .SQL file with the edits that we made on the Statements page right from here. Now we just need to hit Finalize and we're all set. As we can see from the Migrations page, the migration has been finalized. And if we go up to the Databases page, we can see that our new database has been created. And all of our tables are there. The schema has imported successfully. We still have to get the actual data in there though. Right now, all of these tables are empty because we only migrated our schema. So step 3, let's get our data into that database. Frankly, there are a lot of different ways to do this. We do support AWS DMS, and that's how we recommend migrating production databases. We could also use the import SQL command if we're coming from Postgres or MySQL, or we could use third-party tools like pSQL for Postgres databases. There's a lot of options. Let's take a look at something that'll work for pretty much any data formatted as a SQL file, though, importing it using the CockroachDB shell. If it's not already installed on your machine, the first step is going to be to download that tool. The command for this can be found by clicking the Connect button on our clusters page and choosing the CockroachDB SQL client. Once that's downloaded and installed, all we have to do is run this command in the shell. Let's break this down. Here, we're saying use the CockroachDB client to execute SQL from the command line, and to do that in this database. This is our CockroachDB serverless connection string, and note that the database name here is the name of the database we just created when we migrated the schema. Then, we're just pointing to the location of the .sql file where the data is stored. When we execute this command, CockroachDB connects to the cluster and runs all of the SQL queries in that SQL file, which in this case includes a lot of copy statements with all of the data from our old database. So now, if we go to query one of our tables, we can see that the expected data is there. And that's it. We've migrated our old SQL database into CockroachDB, and now we can take advantage of that generous free tier, the automated scaling, high availability, the bulletproof resilience, and sorry, I slipped into marketing mode there for a little bit. Anyway, as I mentioned before, there are actually a lot of different ways that you could approach getting your data into CockroachDB, and you can import data in a variety of file formats beyond just the .sql files that we've used in this video. So if you've got something else, or you just want to try a different approach to importing data into CockroachDB serverless, check out the links in the description below, and they'll walk you through a whole bunch of different ways to import a whole bunch of different types of data.